We have an incredible lineup of speakers for you. We've actually got a Nobel laureate followed by another Nobel laureate. This is an Australia rich in science. The Australian science is fantastic and it's doing so well, but we have to make sure that it continues to do so. So our first Nobel laureate, our outstanding immunologist, Professor Peter Doherty. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much. One of the things I do is tweet, and that's a very bad thing to do because it's sometimes very injudicious. So I actually wrote out my talk because I didn't want to screw it up. And also, following Fiona Stanley and Uncle Ron, there's a pretty big challenge. So forgive me if I'm kind of reading from this. The one thing I want to say that's not in this text, which was published in the conversation actually, is that we're marching because we perceive there's a global threat to science. And that's not, that threat we're not perceiving at the moment in this country. We have governments that I think relatively benign as far as science is concerned. We might like to see them more involved and more interested, but they're not hostile. And also, we would like to see a lot more long-term prospects for young people and so forth. We'd also like to see a lot more involvement from the business culture in Australian science. That's where a lot of the defect is and the problem is. So, to go to my real talk, so we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and of course we just heard from Uncle Ron, and their elders past, present and future. And we should be reminded that the practices they developed over 40,000 plus years of experience allowed Indigenous Australians to live sustainably in this, at times, very harsh country.
They can hear better because they can turn the speakers.
Okay. And there's a lot to learn from these millennia of experience. But today's March for Science is about a fundamentally different way of acquiring and using valid information. In place since the 17th century, the basic rules of science are analysis and measurement of the thing itself, peer review and the open publication of results and conclusions for all to read. We can't just say that something's right and expect that it is so. That's the province of religion and belief. On the website for this march, which is a global phenomenon, the March for Science champions robustly funded and publicly communicated science as a pillar of human freedom and prosperity. We unite as a diverse, non-partisan group to call for science that upholds the common good and for political leaders and policy makers to enact evidence-based policies in the public interest. The March for Science is a celebration of science. The reason that concerned people across the planet are marching today is that at least for the major players in the English-speaking world, there are major threats to the global culture of science. Why is that so? A clear understanding of what is happening with, for example, the atmosphere, the oceans and climate creates irreconcilable problems for powerful vested interests, particularly in the fossil fuel and coastal real estate sectors. Contrary to the data-free trickle-down economic belief system, the observed dissonance implies that we need robust, enforceable, national and international tax and regulatory structures to drive the necessary innovation and renewal that will ensure global sustainability and a decent future for humanity and other complex life systems. There's plenty of action out there in the capitalist model. There's plenty of action by entrepreneurs that would allow us to do that. One of the things we obviously need, though, to facilitate the efforts of those individuals is a price on carbon. That price on carbon is currently being called for by the major international... The call for a price on carbon is currently coming from many of the major international oil companies. It's coming from much of our industry and our industry leaders. And it's also coming from Republican elements in the United States who are trying to see a tax on carbon imposed there. I don't expect they'll have a whole lot of luck, but it's not a right-left issue. It's a human issue, and it's a human rights issue.
Human issue.
And those who paint this as a right-left issue are not serving society and humanity well.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, the March for Science joins a global movement initiated by a perceived anti-science stance in the United States Trump administration. The President's proposed budget for 2018 incorporates massive cuts to the National Science Foundation, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Institutes of Health. These are all United States government agencies. They are not mad left-wing idiots. And though it in no sense reflects political hostility and deliberate ignorance, British scientists are fearful that Brexit will have a terrible impact on their funding and collaborative arrangements. How does this affect us in Australia? Why should we care? The science culture is international and everyone benefits from progress made anywhere. NOAA records and analyses and curates much of the world's climate science data. A degraded US EPA provides a disastrous model for all corrupt and regressive regimes. Science depends on a churn, both of information and people. After completing their PhD ticket, many of our best young researchers will spend 3 to 5 years employed as postdoctoral fellows in the USA, Europe, and increasingly the Asian countries to our north, while young American, Asian, and European British scientists come to work for a time with our leading researchers. The proposed 2008 US President's budget would, for example, abolish the NIH Fogarty International Centre that has enabled many of our young scientists from across the planet to work in North America. In turn, we recruited keepers like Harvard-educated Brian Schmidt, our first resident Nobel Prize winner for physics and current Vice-Chancellor of the Australian National University, the ANU. We might also recall that, supported strongly by Prime Ministers J.J. Curtin and R.J. Menzies, the ANU, with 3 Nobel Prizes to its credit, was founded as a research university to position us in science and in national affairs. What looks to be happening in the USA is, though, by no means a done deal. The US political system is very different from our own. The division of powers in the US Constitution means that the President is in many respects less powerful than an Australian Prime Minister. Unable to introduce legislation, a President can only pass or veto bills that come from the Congress. Through to September, we will be watching a vigorous negotiation process where separate budgets from the House and the Senate, which may well ignore most if not all of the President's ambit claims, will develop a reconciled budget that will be presented for President Trump's signature. The hope is thus that this international celebration of science will cause US legislators, particularly the more thoughtful on the right of politics, to reflect a little and understand what they risk if they choose to erode their current position of global scientific leadership. There are massive problems to be solved, along with great economic opportunities stemming from the development of novel therapies and new, smart, clean and green technologies, in particularly the energy generation and conservation sector. Ignoring or denying problems does not make them go away. I don't wish to know that. The famous Colonel Blimp statement really doesn't work for us. Whether or not the message is welcome, the enormous power of science and technology means we can only go forward if future generations are to experience the levels of human well-being and benign environmental conditions we enjoy today. There is no going back. The past is a largely imagined and irretrievable country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whoops, sorry.